In the heart of a quaint Icelandic village, blanketed in the serene white of winter and illuminated by the ethereal dance of the northern lights, lived Edda, a widow and a talented seamstress. She was the mother of twins, Freyja and Finn. Her life was a tapestry of love, dedication, and the constant hum of her sewing machine. As the chill of December set in, the village buzzed with Christmas preparations. An age-old tradition loomed over the festive air. Every villager must receive a new piece of clothing before Christmas Eve. This was the only way to ward off the Yule cat, a monstrous creature that preyed on those without new garments. The legend of the Yule cat was a tale as ancient as the hills surrounding the village, a tale that Edda had whispered to her children since they were babies. This year, however, was especially hard for Edda. The loss of her husband had left a void, and she found solace in her work, often losing track of time as she stitched and sewed for the villagers. Her hands, once gentle and caressing, were now constantly moving, creating beautiful garments for others. As Christmas Eve drew near, Edda was overwhelmed with orders. Villagers came and went, each leaving her small cottage with new clothes, their faces bright with gratitude. Yet in her diligence, Edda overlooked an essential task. She had not made new clothes for Freyja and Finn. The realization struck her late on the night before Christmas Eve, a wave of dread washing over her as she looked at her children sleeping peacefully, unaware of the danger they were in. Time was against her, but Edda's love for her children fueled a determination that burned fiercely within her. She gathered her fabrics, threads, and needles, and set to work under the dim light of her lamp. The night was silent except for the sound of her sewing machine and the occasional howl of the wind. As dawn approached, Edda had managed to complete a new dress for Freyja, but her heart sank as she realized she wouldn't have enough time or fabric to make a new piece for Finn. Wrapping herself and her children in old cloaks, she stepped into the cold, her heart heavy but her spirit unbroken. The village was quiet, her neighbors still nestled in their homes. Edda knocked on door after door, her pleas met with regretful shakes of heads. Everyone had used their fabrics for their own families. There was nothing left for Finn. As Edda returned home, her mind raced with fear and guilt. She hugged her children close, tears streaming down her face. It was then that a low, ominous growl echoed through the village. The Yule cat was near. Edda gathered Freyja and Finn, holding them tight as they huddled in their cottage. The Yule cat's growls grew louder and closer. Edda could feel its monstrous presence outside, its shadow looming over her window. In the dim light of their humble cottage, Edda held Finn close, her heart pounding with fear. Freyja, safe in her new dress, clung to her brother, sensing the danger that lurked outside. The Yule cat's growls resonated through the air, a menacing rumble that seemed to shake the very walls of their home. On this fateful Christmas Eve, it prowled with a purpose, its eyes set on those who defied the traditions of old. As the family huddled together, the unthinkable happened. With a ferocious might, the Yule cat lunged at the cottage. Its enormous paws, armed with razor-sharp claws, smashed through the wooden window, shattering the glass. Edda screamed, pulling her children back. Its gigantic paw swept through the room, its claws catching Finn's old cloak. In a split second, the creature's powerful grip ensnared the young boy, pulling him towards the gaping hole where the window once stood. Finn's cries pierced the night as the Yule cat retracted its paw, clutching the terrified boy. Edda lunged forward in a desperate attempt to save her son, her hands grasping at Finn's cloak. But the Yule cat's strength was overwhelming, its grip unyielding. In a horrific display of its predatory nature, the beast clamped its jaws around Finn. With the boy secured in its mouth, the Yule cat turned and walked away. Edda, driven by a mother's desperate instinct, sprang to her feet, her eyes fixed on her son. Freyja, tears streaming down her face, followed closely behind. They burst out of the cottage, chasing after the monstrous cat as it strode away in the snowy night. The Yule cat moved with a chilling elegance, its steps almost silent despite its size. Finn, held in its mouth, was tossed side to side as the creature played with him like a toy. Edda struggled to breathe as she ran, her voice hoarse from screaming Finn's name. As they reached the edge of the village, where the houses gave way to the open expanse of snow, the Yule cat halted. With a sudden, brutal motion, it slammed Finn onto the snowy ground. The boy's cry of pain was a sharp stab to Edda's heart. Then, in a gruesome act, the Yule cat lowered its head and bit off Finn's arm. Finn's scream tore through the night, a sound of pure agony that echoed off the mountains. Edda, horror-struck, fell to her knees at the sight. Freya, her face pale and eyes wide in shock, clung to her mother, her body trembling uncontrollably. The beast was about to chomp down on Finn again. But in a moment of sheer terror and helplessness, Edda did the only thing she could. She offered herself to the Yule cat in place of Finn. The creature, with eyes like glowing embers and fur as black as the night, stood before Edda. Its gaze was menacing, but as Edda stood bravely, ready to sacrifice herself for her son, the Yule cat paused, its eyes narrowing. There was something in Edda's stance, a mother's love so fierce and pure, that gave the creature a moment's hesitation. In that brief pause, a miracle occurred. The Yule cat's gaze shifted from Edda to Finn, and for a reason unknown, perhaps a flicker of mercy, it decided to leave. With a swish of its massive tail, it turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a trail of deep paw prints in the snow. Edda crawled to Finn, her hands shaking as she cradled her son's limp body. His face was pale, his breath shallow. The loss of blood and the shock of the attack were taking their toll. Freya sobbed uncontrollably, her small hands reaching out to her brother. The villagers, alerted by the commotion, soon gathered, their faces frozen with horror and disbelief. They helped Edda and Finn back to their cottage. In the aftermath of the encounter with the giant cat, the cottage, once filled with the warmth of a loving family, now echoed with a haunting silence. Finn laid in his bed, his face a ghostly pale, the bandages around his stump a stark reminder of the night's terror. The village doctor treated Finn's wounds, and luckily the boy survived. Edda sat by Finn's bedside and held his one hand gently, her mind racing with emotions. The legend of the Yule cat, a story she had whispered to her children as a cautionary tale, had become a gruesome reality, tearing apart the fabric of their lives. The following night was tense. Edda sat awake in the dimly lit cottage, her eyes darting to every creak and whisper of the wind. Beside her, Finn and Freya, cocooned in their new clothes from neighbors, clung to each other. Then suddenly, past midnight, a deep guttural growl resonated from outside, slicing through the silence like a knife. Edda's heart skipped a beat. With trembling hands, she drew back the curtain. There, illuminated by the ghostly moonlight, was the Yule cat. The creature was inching towards her cottage. Its every step was deliberate, sending a wave of terror through Edda's already racing heart. In a protective instinct, Edda pulled her children closer. Finn's eyes were wide with fear, and Freya buried her face in her mother's side. Outside, the Yule cat's glowing eyes bore into the cottage. Edda and her children huddled together. They could only wait as they listened to the growls of the Yule cat. Each guttural sound from the beast was a reminder of the terrifying reality that lurked just beyond their fragile sanctuary. In the trembling candlelight, Edda's eyes never left the door, her gaze fixed as if willing it to hold against the monstrous force outside. As the night deepened, the intensity of the Yule cat's growls fluctuated. Now a distant rumble, then a threatening crescendo, maintaining a psychological siege on the small family. The night wore on, each minute stretching into an eternity, with the growling of the Yule cat a constant reminder that their nightmare was far from over.